because one of the first principles that really changed my whole perspective and my whole mindset about parenting was that children don't remember the specific incidents. They remember how they felt through the experience.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue Podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. My name is Laurence. Thank you so much for being with us today. A quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to get in touch with the show or sign up to be a guest on a future episode. So joining me today is Marty. Marty is the father to 2 adult children, as well as a grandfather to 1 granddaughter, as well as another grandchild on the way very, very soon. I always find it super fun talking to grandfathers and hearing that transition of father to grandfather and just seeing what that is like. And we talk a lot about the differences in parenting back when he first had his kids and what it's like now. Marty does a lot of research in the world of neuroscience and the development of brains for children especially, and he works alongside lots of leaders in terms of early brain development for children. So we do go quite deep into that topic, and we do talk a lot about action points as well. So if it's something that you're somewhat interested in but you're not too sure about how it kind of is relevant for parents of this day and age, definitely stick with it, because we do talk about a lot of useful resources and useful tools to move forward. So I really appreciate Marty's time. Let's get into the conversation. Marty, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the Dad Dialogue podcast here. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Well, I'm grateful to be here, Laurence. Thank you so much. And I'm just so proud of my family. And I've been a dad, and I'm a granddad now as well. And so I'm a burnout recovery coach. So I do some executive coaching with business leaders. My wife's a teacher, and now my children, of course, are adults, and they are into their own things and involved in their own stuff. My son's a coder in an AI company, and my daughter's a therapist, a counselor. And so it's been very rewarding to be able to see the arc of their experience so far and being able to support them. And, the joy still happens, as I'm connecting with them throughout their life happenings and the events. So I've always appreciated and loved and leaned into all aspects of fatherhood. It's, I know this is kind of cliche to say it's the number one job and the number one important thing in life, but I've really, especially now as I get older, now that I have a grandchild and then one on the way as well, it just gives a whole different perspective to life, and I just so appreciate that.
That's amazing. How long have you been a grandfather now? So how old is your grand?
So my granddaughter is 15 months old, and interestingly enough, since we're in the States, it's a big country. I'm on one coast and she's on the other coast.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm on the East Coast and she's on the West Coast. So that is a challenge. But I have seen her in 15 months. I've seen her live like 4 or 5 times. They've been out here. We've been out there. And we do a lot of FaceTiming and connecting that way. So it's just such a joy. And then watching my son and his wife, my daughter-in-law, be parents and being able to kind of be in that space and being able to be in that energy and be able to kind of be connected to that. It's just a magical experience for me.
So when was the first time you met your granddaughter then, if you're so far away?
That's a great question. I think she was about 6 weeks old.
Okay.
When I first met her. So, we didn't get out there right away, but, we did get out there as quickly as we could. And then it was around the holidays. It was around the fall time and the holidays. So then we went back out for the holidays. And so we got some connection real early a couple times. And then they came out here a couple times as well. So, it's been a very interesting experience, and that's just a beautiful age. And I actually deal with some leaders who deal with that preschool age. So I'm kind of involved in that energy, in that space a lot. And so now that I have a granddaughter in that space, it's doubly rewarding.
Yeah, I'm sure it kind of brings it home again, doesn't it? It makes it super pertinent, super relevant once more. So you said you're expecting another grandchild then. Is that from your son as well, or is that from your daughter?
No, that's from my daughter. So okay. I have 2 kids, and one has a child and one doesn't, both married, been married for a while. And so that's going to be another joy, and we're looking forward to that in several months. And again, it gives a whole new perspective on things and really shifts my view of the world and my connection and my priorities and what I consider as important. And you know, I start to shift different things in terms of my values and how I look at things.
So can you get specific with that? I'd like to dive into that a little bit. What sort of values have you found yourself shifting during that time? Because I guess you would have been a father for quite a long time, but then so this is just a couple of years recently to have made some shifts. I'm curious kind of what that looks like.
Well, parenting is a lot different now, especially for the young ones. And there's a lot more information out there to parents. And there's a lot of focus on some of the skin to skin. Like, for instance, as an example, when I had children, I think they talked about it, but it wasn't as much of a priority to understand of having that skin to skin connection of literally hours, you know, just having no clothes, no anything, just having that skin, and how important that is to the newborn. And so my son and my daughter-in-law took that to the nth degree, and they were just constantly bonding that way with her. And I just found that to be I'm learning new stuff. And even though I've been through the parenting, been down that road, through that journey, and continue to be, a couple times, there's new information out there, new ways of doing things, and different people have different perspectives. As you know, parenting is different for everybody. And so it's just a very rewarding experience to be able to see that happen for my son and my daughter-in-law, and to respect it and also learn at the same time.
I think that's a really positive way to approach things, because thankfully I haven't had this experience, but I've heard of other parents who've had this experience of having the grandparent that wants to kind of pass their own opinions and pass their own feelings and kind of assert dominance in a way of like, well, I raised you this way, therefore this should be happening. And yeah, I can't speak from experience. We're in a kind of similar situation to you, I guess, in that we actually had our kids when we lived in Asia, which is even further away from our family in England. So it was a similar, they didn't meet my children until like the youngest. Well, didn't meet any of my kids until he was like 1 and a bit, I think. So yeah, I can only kind of speak from communicating with other dads of having this kind of overbearing grandparent. But I think appreciating the opportunity to learn and respect other people's kind of thoughts, I think, is a really powerful thing as a grandparent.
And it's not easy. It's not easy, Laurence, because I have to say, there are times we do a lot of FaceTiming, and it'll be a couple of hours. It's not a short FaceTime. They'll just prop up the phone or whatever, and whatever they're doing, and we get to see it. And there's a lot of times where they're doing some things and responding to my granddaughter differently than perhaps we would have, and there have been times when I have my hand on my wife's leg and I'm squeezing it a little bit, like watching what's going on in front of us. So it falls on a continuum, on a scale. We try to be respectful and observe. They ask us our opinions on some things and what do you do? And they want to know, especially my son, how he was when he was 15 months old. And, he wants to kind of look at his journey as what he's experienced now as a parent. And some days I'm able to stay out of it, and some days I'm wanting to be more opinionated and wanting to be connected. So it is a work in progress to be able to keep that distance and hold that space.
So again, what's an example of that time that you've grabbed your wife's leg and wanted to kind of keep your opinions to yourself? Can you think of something specific?
Well, I will say, specifically, I would say, just as a general thing, so my granddaughter is very active, so it's hard for her to sit in a high chair while she's eating. And so she's very fidgety. She want one leg out of the high chair, trying to escape, and she's engaged with the food and eating the food, but she still is moving, and she has a lot of energy. And so my son built a contraption. It's like a tower where she can actually stand to eat. So she comes to the table now, and it's not necessarily like a high chair, but it sort of is an adapted kind of a piece of furniture, and it's fully safe and everything. But she's standing while eating, and she loves it now, and she's right up there in the action, and she doesn't try to escape. And it seems like it's a legitimate and healthy response, but it's still, while watching it, it takes a lot to kind of buy in sometimes. It's just something different than how we would have handled that. And so I have to say that, again, I learned though, because she's not trying to escape. And there were times where she would squirm and get into a situation, knock stuff over. And now it's all calm, and it's a very calm meal time for them. So it seems to have worked. But for me, it's not something, it went down a path that I was very curious as to how that was going to work out.
No, that's really interesting. I haven't really thought of that, because I can identify, especially my younger son, he was very wriggly, and he probably would have enjoyed something like that, but we never considered something like that. I mean, when they're eating snacks and things during the day, they're just wanting to wander around, and, we try and remind them that the healthiest way to eat your snack is to just sit down. So you don't have to sit at the table for your snack. You can at least sit on the floor or whatever. But the idea of coming up like that is really interesting to me, because I think I'm surprisingly old-fashioned for someone of my age. To me, the dinner table is sacred. Like that was something that I really wanted to get into my family as a value. Like, at dinner time, we're all gonna, like, obviously when my kids are currently 5 and 3, so at that age it's pretty easy to, like, okay, we're all gonna eat dinner together, we're gonna sit and we're gonna talk and blah 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 blah, no phones, etc., etc. So to me, like, that is something that's really important. So yeah, like, the actual act of sitting and, like, respecting the time and respecting the other people's communication and conversation is super, as I said, sacred in a way. So yes, like, if I were to involve him standing and moving around, that might have been a challenge, but I can definitely see it being of use to avoid that, like, especially at that age. Like, sometimes when they're like 16 months or 15 months, whatever it is, you just need to do something to get them to work. It's not necessarily you're laying down a law for the rest of your life. Like, this is how it's always going to be. This is just what we need to do for now, and we'll kind of see where it goes from there.
And interesting that you bring that up, because that's, when I was a parent and back at that age, I wasn't able to see that perspective. And I appreciate that kind of context, and that we're going to get through this stage and stage of development, and we don't have to sweat out the details as long as everyone's safe getting through it. And through 2 months, 3 months, 6 months is going to be a different issue. It's not going to be this issue. It happens so quickly. So to really get stuck on the issues and really go back and forth, if you can find something that's workable, and that's, safe and healthy, that seems to be the way to be able to get through stuff like that.
Indeed. And I think the biggest thing I've learned from being a parent and doing this podcast is that, for I'd say 95% of topics within parenting, it's not black and white. Like, there obviously are some things that are black and white, but it's very rare that things are quite as black and white as we maybe want them to be. So, like, it's not just a case of doing enough research and coming with a definitive answer, because there are so many topics that have a huge scale of, like, what people say and what this study says and what this person's story says and it's just, you really do have to just really think about it and obviously discuss it with your family members and ensure that you're on the same page, because things are not black and white most of the time. So at least that's what I've learned from my short time of parenting.
And I think one of the art of being a parent is to pick and choose your battles.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you can get through mealtime, and if you get, you don't want everything to be a battle, to get through certain things. So, be able to come up with quick solutions and ways to get through things and not have to always constantly battle through it, I think is a positive thing in terms of the relationship building.
So just staying on the topic of grandfathering or grandfatherhood, have you as obviously now your daughter is pregnant, I'm curious if you've noticed, would you say that she is already a mum, but then your son only became a father when his son was actually born? Because obviously I know a lot of people say this about men and women.
Well, that's a very good question, Laurence, and that brings up a very good point. So, when I was growing up, I have two sisters, and I have a couple older cousins that have babies, and I don't think, and this is a strong when you say never, but I don't think I ever held a baby before I had a baby. No one ever handed me a baby when I was a kid. My sisters, for whatever reason, because of whether it's a gender thing or whatever, they were holding babies. And when my cousin would want to go change her baby or go nurse her baby, my sisters would want to go with them, and they would want to experience that. And I didn't really want to have anything to do with that. But on the other hand, no one ever actually put the baby in my hands and said, hey, Marty, sit down and hold the baby. So we were very intentional about doing that with my son. So as he grew up, having both my son and my daughter, every time we had babies come in, we had him interact with the babies. And again, it wouldn't be some of the more stressful things like changing or feeding, or I think he fed some of the babies. Quite frankly, I can picture him holding a spoon and feeding some of my cousin's kids. But being able to normalize or condition my son to actually have some level other than zero. Because again, for me, I had zero interaction with babies before I became a father. And as he grew up and seeing him, and again, then it becomes when, at stressful times when the baby's crying or needs help or needs to be changed or whatever, which parent steps up. And I know that there's, different families, like you said, there's no black and white. It's handled differently in different situations. And it's just been very rewarding and almost it's an awesome feeling to see my son connect with his daughter at times when it's not just play and having fun, when she needs something or she's stressed or he figures it out and he tries different things. And I see him, doing different things to try to meet her needs. And that's just a beautiful part of being a grandparent.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool. And I think to kind of be able to kind of stake your claim on that and kind of look back on that is a really powerful thing, especially because, again, from doing this podcast and my own personal experience, many dads are kind of just like, wait, what? Like, what's going on? Like, this child is having what impact on our life? And I'm supposed to, I've spoken to a few people before about the idea of how movies have ruined it for some of us, with like this magical connection moment, and like there's harps playing and like the light shines in, kind of like it's doing on you right now. There's some light coming in through the window for any of the video watchers.
Yes.
And like the movies portray it as that, and there's going to be this magical moment with like your 2-hour old newborn or whatever. It's going to hold your hand, and you're going to have this instant connection. And it seems that maybe does happen, but quite rarely, and it takes a lot of work for some guys to kind of get this connection going. So for you to kind of state your claim and like you've seen your son kind of grow this connection and have this connection is super valuable. So I'm wondering, you must be pretty excited to then see your daughter become a mother soon.
Oh, I am very excited. I do want to mention something about the point you just made in terms of the movies and the stereotypes. I will say here in the United States, it gets even more challenging because a lot of our commercials and advertisements are about the bumbling dad. There's a lot of push out there from the media about how mom has to come in and rescue, and mom has to do this, and mom's got all the answers, and dad this, and that may be true in some situations, but it sends a very interesting message to young males. And, it's probably a whole different conversation, Laurence, but, what are those media messages? What kind of values and what kind of beliefs, core beliefs are being formed in both male and female mother and father when it comes to stressful situations? Who's going to handle it? Because I'll be quite frank with you. I was well trained by my wife. And when I say that, not only was I sharing the responsibilities, but her support of knowing that I had never done it before and showing me how to do it, being there with me while I did it, and then being able to leave me alone and do it myself, whether it was changing diapers or feeding. And so that process of nurturing me as a father from my wife, who had never done it before, she was a new mom, but because of her experience, her interaction, perhaps maybe some of her gut reactions and instinctual reactions to things, but she was supportive of me making mistakes. I can remember one time when I changed my son's diaper. He was, I forget how old, very young as an infant. And we had a whole changing table, and he was having a bad day, a bad, poopy accident. And for whatever reason, I would pick up his legs every time he would have the accident, and it started to have projectile all over the room. So here I was trying to deal with this situation, not really responding and making the situation worse as it was making the whole room messy. And my wife was able to come in, and rather than judgment and shaming and, being able to have that rescuer, she was able to support me. We've laughed about it ever since. I'm not sure we were laughing in the moment at that time, but sure. The idea was there was a learning curve for me as a new father. and having that support from my wife. Again, my firstborn, he was very, very active. Or my secondborn, she was just the opposite, where she would sit for long periods of time and not be that active. And so having the firstborn being very active, we needed, both. It was all hands on deck at certain times with my son, being able to shift him and hand him off, and her being able to eat while I took care of him, and me being able to eat while she took care of him. So a lot going on with that. And the key was, I think, our connection and our ability to learn together and support each other through the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important. And I think you've really touched on a super important topic of, how I believe so strongly in marriage, and, how important it is to be super intentional and purposeful about what a marriage is, and how to nurture a marriage, and how to nurture your spouse, and what you're describing is exactly kind of what I agree with. And yeah, if you come into those situations with division and anger and disappointment, even, it's just not a recipe for success. And I think a steady parenting journey kind of comes off the back of a super steady marriage from, and that's just how I perceive things and how I would interpret things. And
from my studies, Laurence, I've done a lot of work on the developing brain, the human brain. And a lot of parents, unfortunately, don't think that's having an impact on the child, the stress between the two parents and any bickering or arguing or whatever's happening. And the child picks up everything. They pick up, and if two parents, even through stressful situations, even through adversity, can come together and somehow talk respectfully and be able to support each other, and then even perhaps laugh about it later, that kind of thing, get through stuff like that, it means a lot to the children. And those implicit memories, those subconscious memories, those emotional memories that kids are always storing from birth. I don't think parents are as sensitive to the fact that what they're communicating right in front of the child is actually, even though they're a newborn or a 6-month-old or a 1-year-old and they're very young, they're still picking up that emotion. They're still picking up the discord. They're still picking up the conflict. And so, to be sensitive to that, I think, is important for new parents.
Oh yeah, definitely. And, they pick up on those negative things, but at the same time, I think they pick up on the positive. If they're lots of love and affection and care and selflessness, I think they pick up on that also. So,
that's an interesting thing, Laurence, because I have my father's 92 years old.
Wow.
And he and I have been laughing together ever since I was born. I can't remember one day in my father's life that we didn't laugh about something.
Wow.
My kids told me that we laughed every day, that there was something we just found funny or charming or something, and we giggled and laughed. They remember laughing almost every day. And now I see my son and my daughter-in-law and my granddaughter laughing about things. And she's always smiling, and she's hiding things, and she's playful, and she's curious. And so that positive stuff, like you're saying, is just like glue for connection and relationship. And, if you go back to the brain, all that positive release of the dopamine and the serotonin and the oxytocin, and that's all that connection stuff that infants and toddlers and young children are going through constantly. I mean, that's the whole thing attachment and everything is based around, is how that child feels about how the adults are responding around them. So, yeah, it's very important for parents to do that. And it's rewarding to be able to see that and be able to be in that space.
Yeah, I do want to dive into some of your expertise in the brain research and so on. But I do just want to loop back to your daughter kind of preparing to become a mother. Is she kind of nearby you, or is she also on the other side of
she's rather close. So she's in Philadelphia. Okay. So she's rather close. So she's a car ride away. And she and her husband, my son-in-law, they're in the nesting area where they're building furniture and they're moving stuff around and they're painting and, going through all of that nesting stuff. And so, getting themselves mentally and physically ready for that. And so that's very interesting. And that's been interesting because we can, since we're a little bit closer in proximity, we can be more connected to that in real time rather than just hearing about stories or kind of getting, kind of abridged versions of things. But that's just been a very interesting thing. And again, just the joy of being able to go through that process. I think that's been that's been something that I really appreciate for my kids. And my daughter right now seems to be going through that.
And when would your next grandchild be due?
Expected in June.
Okay. Nice summer baby. Cool. I find that nesting period so interesting, like seeing new parents go through that, and then just the wild, like the complete shift when they come to have their second, and it's just like nothing like it. And I've always said on this platform as well as others, like I find it super interesting that when you have your first kid, it seems to be the time when most people are willing to help. No, like, baby shower, or we'll come around and help get your place ready, or you've had the baby, we'll cook for you, and so on and so on. But if anyone needs help, it's the people that have had their second kid and they have like a toddler running around, like putting their hair out at the same time. Like, come look after that kid whilst we like look after the newborn for a few hours. Like, those are the people that need help. And like, I mean, after that, I've spoken to dads that have like, I recently had 2 guests in a row, like one had 5 kids, one had 6 kids.
Oof.
That's a lot. You know, after that, it was a lot.
That's when you go from man to man to zone defense, Laurence. That's you're just doing everything to get through stuff.
Honestly, I said that to actually my last guest, because his wife is pregnant with their 3rd. So yeah, that's what I said to them. It's like, you're outnumbered now. Like, when they get bigger, what are you going to do?
That's you
have to like choose
2 hands, 2 kids. That's all I could. That's all I could manage.
I'm very happy with 2. My biggest concern for someone that has 3 kids is like, maybe the kids get old enough and they're smart enough. Like, we can work out who is really the favorite. If we all just like run off in different directions, and mum and dad have to choose someone.
Right.
But not with 5 and 6. So I guess you just have some trust aspects in there. But yeah, let's dive into a little bit about your experience with the brain. And you said you're a burnout coach. I listened to your TEDx talk talking about kind of like trauma healing. And on this podcast, I've mentioned like dipping my little toe into the understanding of like neural pathways, and this, when it comes to especially addiction in terms of TV and screen time. This is like some of the research that I've done specifically that has led me to this path. So I'm in no way an expert. So I'm curious to kind of hear your opinion on what your research and expertise has kind of led you in terms of thinking about parenting in this new age, especially with your experience as a grandfather of, obviously, as we touched on, like parenting when your children were young and parenting now.
So I didn't start to get this information until my kids were probably maybe 8 or 9 years old. Okay. So I learned all of this as they got older, and it was very valuable for me to understand how the brain was developing and what the brain needed. And a lot of it was about regulation. I have a lot of anxiety issues myself, and I didn't want my kids to have anxiety issues, and that can be passed along. So I was really trying to respond to them and some of the challenges, stresses, and things they were going through in different ways to be able to be intentional. You can't be perfect parents, but you be intentional parents and really be kind of purposeful in how you're responding. What I learned about the brain, Laurence, and what I've actually shared with a lot, because I have a trauma-informed background. I'm trauma certified. I'm also certified in something called the neurosequential model of education. Neurosequential model is just a big word for brain mapping. They can actually take through fMRI scans and PET scans. They can actually take pictures of the brain in real time. And so what they do with kids, especially with kids with very significant diagnosis like RAD, reactive attachment disorder, and some other very significant diagnosis, is they take pictures of their brain in intervals, and they can actually see how the brain is changing based on the responses, the environments that these kids are in, the responses of the adults around them, and things like that are actually impacting the brain wiring and the neural pathways. And I don't want to get too much into the, I'm a brain geek, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but it's always changing. The brain's always changing. And based on a child's experiences and the relationships, only about 1/3 of the human brain is formed at birth. The rest of the brain is formed by the experiences people go through and the relationships. And a lot of it when you're young is those emotional experiences. And so if that child's surrounded by a lot of emotionally, let's say, emotionally secure, emotionally intelligent adults, where they're regulated, they're able to stay calm themselves, they're aware of how they react in situations, they have support from others, they show empathy and compassion and some of the other things that children need at some point. And you have those types of positive responses from adults. That's going to form the brain in one way. Way on the other end of the continuum, you have adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And so some children, and I deal with a lot of children in Philadelphia and marginalized community, what we call marginalized communities here in the States and in the inner city, where children have been through a lot of traumatic situations and a lot of lack of stability in their early years. And it impacts how their brain has developed. And so I've gone through and I've actually been able to connect with all sorts of communities around this brain information, especially preschool teachers. And we have what's called early childhood educators, because I don't know all the procedures all over the world, but here in the States, a lot of parents need to have childcare for that infant very young. So we have a lot of parents will put infants into childcare from like 6 months old. And then it goes up until our kindergarten, which is 5 years old. And that's a very impactful time for the brain. And so being able to touch and train and be able to help and coach educators and parents and leaders of these early childhood centers has been very rewarding, because I've been able to help bring awareness and understanding to how impactful it is to every interaction that those teachers and every interaction those parents and every adult is having with children is actually wiring their brain. And so then when we become adults, when that individual becomes adults and they're struggling with some adult issues, sometimes it goes back to what's happened to them as children. And a lot of adults, they have this misunderstanding that they've outgrown their adversity. Well, I could give you a couple books. The Body Remembers, The Body Keeps Score. There's all sorts of trauma-based books where everything lives in your DNA, in your mind and body, and your brain is impacted, memory imprints, trauma memories. There's all sorts of things going on that impact us as adults. So if we can interrupt that process, and I've been very supportive of parents in general, but especially fathers and grandfathers, Laurence. I've run all sorts of groups involved in all sorts of social media stuff, specifically for dads and now grandfathers, about how important it is. Again, we can't be perfect, but we can be intentional and purposeful in terms of staying calm, in terms of what we're saying, in terms of like I grew up with a lot of shame-based messaging. And so a lot of things I would say to my son early on, I would say I was always very sarcastic. Adults were sarcastic to me when I was young. And so it was just instinctual for me to say something to him like, what part of get off the computer don't you understand? And I would say that to my young son who could not control his impulses to be one. He was 7 or 8 at the time, 9, and he's supposed to be down for dinner or doing whatever he's doing. And I'm using sarcasm to try to change his behavior. Well, I learned real quickly, and again, it's always a work in progress, but we can say what we want to say and send the message, but the words we use and how and our nonverbal, when I get very upset, I get a vein that pops out of my head. So that's very scary to kids. When dad comes to you and his whole face is now changed. So I learned really early to try to get a calm demeanor and a calm body language and my nonverbal communications, because my kids told me when they were younger, when we would have talk, they would hear me coming, the hair would stand up in the back of their neck. Like, here comes dad. And I didn't want that. I didn't want that kind of presence of I wanted it to be, oh, here comes dad. Let me show him something. I didn't want to, oh my gosh, here comes dad. And the good news is throughout my journey of being able to make mistakes and do trial and error and respond in different ways in support of my family, I was able to set that up to where my son was able to shift to, hey, dad, let me show you what I'm doing. And hey, come see this, which was a great part of our relationship, especially when he got into be a teenager and got into all sorts of cool stuff. He was able to share that with me.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear. Thanks for sharing. I think that's like the relationship that all dads want to be having with their kids. I do want to pick up on something that you mentioned, and I'm going to preface this question with that I know that every parent is different. Every parent situation is different, and people fit different roles differently. And there are some parents out there that they are not fulfilled and they're not satisfied unless they are working. They're meeting goals, they're meeting deadlines, they're hitting targets. Like, I get that. I've spoken to some dads on this podcast who did stay at home dad life for 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever. And like they were appreciative of the ability to do it, but they disliked the day to day, let's say. Like they loved their kid, they loved the fact that they could give them that time, but the actual day to day, they just didn't find enjoyment. So my question, with that being said, you mentioned the 6 month to 5-year-old age and how it's so common, obviously, in America. It is kind of similar here in the Netherlands, where lots of parents are leaving their children with childcare from very early. What is your kind of like professional opinion on that? And do you think there is an answer, let's say, in terms of what is best practice, just in terms of like neural development for these young children?
That's a very complex question because really it depends upon the situation, because what you're looking for is response. So, with parents, depending upon, of course, how many kids are in the household, how big the household is, is there a different response in terms of ratios? Perhaps it's 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 1-to-2. I mean, and now you get into a classroom situation, and now you've got more kids, and there's been very positive research around the socialization and some of the kids that have been in daycare at earlier ages, and some of the advantages, some of the strengths. They build up resilience. They're able to handle stress in different ways. But it's the response and the memories that are being stored, the emotional memories in their brain, and a lot of attachment is based on, am I worth it? Or is there someone there coming to help me? And so, for instance, if in a childcare situation, again, this is why it's very complex. So if you're if you're bringing your infant to a childcare and they're being left in a soiled diaper and no one's responding to them crying or changing their diaper for an extended period of time, that's not the response we're looking for. If you're in a childcare where they do get the response, where the ratios are good, and that's what I train. I train those leaders to be able to understand ratios and how to get support. And when one teacher is occupied, how they can bring in other adults into the room, specifically because the emotional memories that are being stored in that 6-month-old, that 1-year-old, 2-year-old may be different because they're in a daycare situation than if they were at home. And so the memories that are being stored is the adult that's around me, are they responding to my needs? And if they are, and if it's a daycare situation where the response is pretty strong and pretty healthy, and perhaps for some parents, because a lot of the emotion's taken out, and you have your daycare teachers that have been through this situation, this is not their first rodeo, and they deal with that type of behavior and have the tools to deal with that behavior. A lot of parents can learn from early childhood educators as to how to stay calm in situations and not to give in so quickly, perhaps, in situations. And so there is a lot of, I wish I had a definitive answer for you, but it really depends upon the situation, what kind of daycare. I've seen daycares, early childhood education, top and bottom, up and down in terms of the quality of response. And again, I deal with a lot of leaders who are trying to get more trauma informed, try to get to have their educators be more empathic, be more compassionate, be more understanding. The trauma, the principle in trauma is to look at children as not what's wrong with them, but what's happened to them to cause them to behave a certain way. And a lot of teachers, a lot of preschool teachers in childcare don't look at kids that way. They look at kids as entitled, or they look at kids as this way or that way, and they start to label children, other teachers as well. And that's tough for kids. That's a tough thing, because what happens for kids, as you may or may not know, you probably do, is they start to behave into the labels we give them. And so if we're actually saying that they can't control themselves, or you can never calm down, and you don't share, you always budge in front, you always have to be first, they're going to behave that way. And so adults need to understand that. And depending upon if it's the parents that are doing that, or if it's a early childhood educator, it's about what that adult's in that child's life, the surrounding adults that are responding. That emotional blueprint is being set by the adult reactions. And so if you got a great daycare center, a great childcare center, that can be a positive thing. If the ratios aren't as healthy, that may be something that is not as positive.
No, awesome. Thanks. That's a really measured response. And I appreciate your insight into that, because it's obviously a topic that comes up. And I think, again, like we said earlier, like most things in parenting aren't black and white. So I think there's a really measured response that kind of honors the people who are responsible for children in these certain settings, whether it be a stay-at-home parent or a childcare worker. And it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's all about how things are happening. That emotional blueprint, like you said, I think is a really powerful way to look at things. So I'm I would like to unpack a little bit of application, maybe in terms of someone that's listening can kind of take away from this, because you've mentioned yourself that you weren't really aware of some of these things until your kids were around about the age of 8 or 9. So you can maybe talk to this from personal experience with your kids and also from professional experience. What takeaways would you say to someone that was in that situation? Oh yeah, my kid's 8 or 9. I haven't really thought too much about, like, I know that I should be like positive and happy, but I blow up every now and then. I don't have the best systems in place. I haven't really thought too much about the brain development of this early childhood age. What practically do you think someone with children around that sort of age could maybe do coming away from this podcast?
Well, that's a great question, because the brain can always be changed. And when I learned the information, Laurence, I was like, oh my gosh, I needed this when my kids were born. I'm 9 years late. I'm thinking, my goodness, what about all the ways I was talking? What about all that sarcasm I was saying? What about that? It's whatever imprint's been made up until that point, we can change how we're responding, and that will change the neural pathways and the wiring of the brain. And so with new awareness and new understanding of the way we say things, the words that we're saying, the nonverbal communication, everything that I kind of broke down with that, we can start to pick up tools. The number one thing is how to stay calm ourselves, because I can tell you with the human brain, a dysregulated adult cannot calm down an upset child. If we're feeling a certain something ourselves and we're frustrated or we're feeling defeated or whatever we're feeling, and then we go in to try to connect with a child who's upset, chances are that emotion is just going to escalate. And so that's what I was. I was all about going emotion first. And the first thing I learned when I started to get this information was to be regulation first, myself, and then for my children, find some way to go take a walk, get down in color, to find something to do to get us into a calmer before we start to go through all the parenting things, the consequences of the behavior. And didn't we talk about this? And how do you think she felt when you took away her toy and you didn't give her a return? And everything, all the talking that we want to do to children until they're actually regulated and the brain is ready to hear it. Just like as adults, sometimes the words just go through and we don't even hear the words that people are saying because we're so emotionally activated or hijacked. And so I would say to a parent, even parents, and I deal with a lot of parents like this as well, that may have some regrets as to how they responded, or they may have used, some corporal punishment, spanking, or they may have done something that they regret. And everything can be learned and everything can be changed. And quite frankly, it's the long haul. It's being able to understand and disrupt the process, because those types of behaviors do get handed down through generations. And if we can disrupt the process at any point, we start to move the trajectory to something more positive and something healthier. And so it can happen in little bits. I mean, there were literally times, Laurence, where I would lose my patience with my kids. And I would have to tag out. My wife would come in and I'd tag her in, and I'd go up in my room, turn on the TV really loud, and have to pace my room and do circles just to break the stress of having a 4-year-old defeat me. He'd be stronger than me, and he'd be pushing my buttons and making me say and do things that I really didn't want to say or do. And so understanding that and being able to build tools was able to actually change the trajectory of things. And even though that first 9 years, I probably could have used more of the tools and more of the information, being able to change things. And I was just going to bring up also that I've had this conversation now that my kids are adults. We have very frank conversations about parenting and different things that happen throughout their lives. We're very open in being able to discuss certain things, especially with my daughter, who shares a lot of some of the anxiety issues and some other things that I deal with. I guess everyone has some different level of anxiety. And she actually now mollifies and regulates me. And so we're able to kind of be able to, connect with each other and be able to get to a place where we're regulated. That's a therapist in her. So she's crushing that. I think to any parent, and I do deal with a lot of parents, especially dads, especially fathers, that may be at that spot where they're kind of just learning new information. They have this aha moment. They have this light bulb moment, like, maybe the way I was saying things wasn't the best way to say things. And how is my child going to remember? Because one of the first principles that really changed my whole perspective and my whole mindset about parenting was that children don't remember the specific incidents. They remember how they felt through the experiences.
Yeah.
And those feelings and those emotions, and it's not going to be necessarily what dad said or what mom said or what was the response, breaking it down logically. It's going to be, how did I feel? Was there someone there to support me? Did I feel shamed? Did I feel anxious out of that situation? Or did I feel like I was supported and someone got it? Did I feel seen and heard and understood? I tell parents that all the time, Laurence. If you get out of this situation, allow your child to have that voice. Allow them, even though it's something that you don't agree with, active listening. Listen actively doesn't mean you agree with what they're saying. You're accepting for them. That's how they feel in this moment, or they think in this moment. And just by that acceptance, just by reflecting back, wow, you're really frustrated, or this is, you really wish someone would have helped you. It leaves the emotional imprint on that child that, hey, dad gets me, mom gets me. They understand me. Now we move on to the next step, whether it's consequences or maybe it's a teaching, learning experience or teachable moment. But at first, if we can emotionally connect first and validate that emotion, that's what kids are going to remember. And once I shifted that, just how I got my child off the computer was just as important as getting him off the computer.
Yeah.
And how I could shame him. I could yank the cord out. I had dads that just went back there and yanked the cord right out of the computer, and I could overpower him. But what emotional memories is that leaving in my son's mind, in my child's, the connections and the pathways. And once I became sensitive to that, and certainly we can all look back to the adults, whether it's our parents or other adults in our lives, and really kind of think back, who was more, how do we feel seen and heard and understood? Like, who was more emotionally connected to us? Who was more accepting? Who was more tolerant? Who was more patient or compassionate with us? And I think for us as adults, we remember that because it's that emotional connection and that emotional validation that's so important for children. So that's usually where I first go with parents who may have this aha moment. Like, even as I deal with a lot of parents of teenagers, and now, a lot of where you are, Laurence, where you explained to 5 and 3, where your kids are, this now period between now and even because once they're teenagers, it's hard. It becomes very challenging. They're breaking away. They're becoming independent. Just to sit them down and have eye contact and have conversations can be challenging. So a lot of the hard work is done when they're 5, when they're 3, when they're 8, when they're 10. Because if you wait until they're 13, 14, or 15, it gets a lot harder. But those are the parents, especially the dads, quite frankly, that I actually support. And I've actually helped through that situation. Because unfortunately, one of the challenges is the teenage issues and the problems become a little bit more pronounced. They're driving, they're dating, there's all sorts of things going on that that parenting becomes more intense. And so being able to understand the emotional connection there and being able to validate emotions and active listen. And if you have to say something, do it in an assertive way, not in an aggressive way or a passive way, and let the teenager or the child get away, but be able to state it neutrally without bringing in old stuff and past incidents and experiences, but find out ways to communicate assertively. And so I coach a lot of parents the words to use. A lot of it's timing with children, being able to get them down off that emotional ledge, get them down to an emotional regulation before then being able to step in and correct any behavior.
No, that's awesome. And I'm reminded of a book. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called, I've mentioned it on the podcast before. It's called How to Talk So Little Kids Will Listen. It's specifically for kids up to age 7, but it's like a newer version of a book that basically the author of this book I just mentioned is the daughter of someone who wrote a book which is just called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, which is like aimed at older kids. And they talked a lot about what we were talking about, but they had a lot of good strategies, and a couple just really stick out, and ones that I really have implemented. One of which is like what you mentioned about hearing them and really honoring their thoughts. So like an example might be you've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. The 1-year-old needs to take a nap, but the 3-year-old is desperate to go to the playground, but he can't. So kicking and screaming and throwing a bit of a tantrum, you kind of like sit down with them and you try and write down a list. Well, you obviously talk about what the problem is, but you write down a list of possible solutions. You say, okay, so what do you really want to do? Well, you really want to go to the playground, and you just write it down. And but what else could we do? Oh, we could play with cars. Or what else could we do? Oh, we could fly to the moon, and whatever silly things come out, you write it down and you kind of talk it out, and then you cross it out depending on which one is, physically viable. And you just honor the kids' ideas, and that process just really kind of brings them down. And in practice, it can be difficult to find the time to do that, especially if there are two kids fighting. But honestly, just honoring that situation is so powerful. And then the other one, which I definitely implemented many, many times, is that they say, you actually, like, if you find yourself prone to losing your patience and maybe raising your voice a little bit, especially when it comes to giving children instructions, children don't actually seem to get upset by like a noun, just one noun. So you just say that noun. So for example, put your shoes on, and the child doesn't do it. And if you say it 4 or 5 times and then you shout for them, put your shoes on, like that's shouting, can make them upset. But if you just shout shoes 30 times in 30 seconds, they find it hilarious. But for you, it's just that little bit, for me at least, it's that little bit of release, just satisfies that itch. Like, I've got this tension building, shoes, 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 shoes. They find it hilarious. I've got a little bit of satisfaction out of it. No one's hurt, and it does actually get done.
That's the perfect parenting tool. That's the perfect parenting tool.
That's what I say. They said it has to be a noun. It can't be a verb. If you tell them like move, like that's different. But if it's just a noun, like coat or shoes, pencils, crayons, whatever it is, if you find yourself getting to that point and like there's nowhere else to go, just enjoy the noun and shout it a little bit. It works.
Wow. So great tools. And if you can find tools like that, again, to put in your parenting tool, about how valuable that is. You mentioned that book. So that was the first parenting book I actually read. How to Talk So Your Children Will Listen, and Listen So Your Children Will Talk. And you mentioned that written by her daughter, and that whole thing with the lists. The reason I want to pause you on there, because it's a bit of a humorous story with my son, because we did that. And that was one of his discipline things. We're sitting down and making a list. And it gave the theory or the philosophy behind that is to give the child agency, to give them some level of power and control in coming up with things. And you also mentioned a beautiful tool that I teach parents a lot of times is to give the child in fantasy what they can't have, in reality. We're going to jump in a spaceship and we're going to zoom right over to the zoo or the mall or whatever, and give them in fantasy, because it connects with them and it makes them feel like dad understands me. He gets what I'm saying. So because a lot of parents they don't want to do something that's, we're not going to get into a spaceship and we're not going to do that. Why would I tell them we're going to do that? Well, you have to understand how the child's brain actually operates. So I just appreciate you pointing that out. And back to the list. So my son, as he was getting older, because we used that sitting down with lists, he would roll his eyes at me. So now I don't know how old he was, but he was old enough to be like 9, 10 years old. Oh, dad wants to make the lists again. Mom, hide the pen. Be like, Mom, hide the pen. No more lists. No more lists. But I appreciate you sharing. Again, when you said the shoes, being able to express that energy on your end, to be able to get some energy out, have it be received in a humorous way on your son's end or the child's end. That's just a beautiful tool. And stuff like that, things like that, to me are magic to me, because that's so specific about you and your son and that situation. And that's what parenting is all about. A lot of people want the book. A lot of people, what books did you and your wife read? Give me a book. I wish I could. I mean, if it was a book, they would have handed that at the hospital. After you gave birth, they would have handed you the book, right? But it's the art of understanding the child, and every child's different, even within the same family, Laurence. And again, I don't know. I don't want to know a lot of time for this, but just within your two children, there's probably different tools that you need, parenting tools. I need a completely different parenting. I still need different ways of responding to my adult children in different ways. Yeah. And I can just imagine, as you mentioned, with families with more than 2, there's now parenting tool belts for all 5 children or all, multiple children. And so it's more of an art than a science, for sure. It's a matter of really being able to attune to who that child is, because a lot of adults have a difficult time with authenticity, Laurence. And one of the things I've learned in my experience and my research is that as children, we're constantly trying to please the adults around us. And we start to live into roles that aren't necessarily authentic. And then we develop as adults, and we realize, well, why do I react this way? And why do I say these things and that's not really me. And I'm not really, that doesn't feel right. And I'm having, this cognitive dissonance about how I'm saying one thing, but I'm really feeling another. And stalking that authenticity is something that almost takes a lifetime for some people. And if we can help children feel seen and heard and be authentic when they're young, they wouldn't have that issue when they're adults.
Indeed. That's awesome. No, thanks so much for sharing. So I think that's a nice place to move on to the final question that I ask every guest who comes on Dad Dialogue, is to think back to before you became a dad for the very first time, maybe a few months before. What do you think Marty back then could have done with hearing before welcoming his children into the world?
I think before I had kids, I wish I would have heard more about how unique of a situation it would be. I did a lot of reading. I was the kind of person who wanted to bone up on parenting, and I read a lot of books before I had a child, and all the books went out the window, quite frankly. I mean, some of the stuff may have lasted, but really being able to have the support and understand the awesome impact that the unique impact that parents have, especially dads, can really have a different impact. Moms too, certainly in their own way, but dads in their own way, in their own unique way, can have an impact. I've dealt, quite frankly, Laurence, I've dealt with a lot of kids, especially kids impacted by trauma, who don't have fathers, and they have father hunger is a real thing. And being able to understand the absence of a father and what that means for some people as they're growing up. Not everybody has the benefit of that. And so I would I wish someone would have told me about that awesome, unique opportunity, because I guess even if someone would have, maybe it wouldn't have connected, because again, the book kind of didn't connect as well. But I guess just hearing it, I also would have, like I mentioned earlier, Laurence, and I tried to be very intentional with this with my son, is being able to be more acclimated and being more socialized around babies when I was before I had a baby. Being able to not fall into maybe the gender stereotypes every time a baby came into the room and all the females would go over and support that new mom or whatever. I don't know what kind of, I don't know what kind of changes need to be made procedurally or behaviorally to get boys or young men more involved in that before they have kids. But I really think that's the one thing. I just wish I would have, again, I'm a learner. And I wish I would have had more understanding, and more understanding would mean actual experience, not what you can read in a book. Actual hands-on, get your hands dirty, get peed on, get spit up on. I mean, my sisters used to wear the diaper, and the baby used to spit up on the diaper, and I used to be like horror that the baby. Now, I used to wear spit up like aftershave when I first became a father. It didn't bother me at all. It didn't bother me at all. So just in that, being able to get past the uniqueness of it, to get past the novelty, of it, and to understand and have more experience, I think would have been helpful for me before I actually had kids.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the response. That's a super interesting response to that question. I don't think we've really had that before. But no, that's really interesting. And I agree. I wonder if something would need to be done for more young men to be kind of that way inclined, to just think, not necessarily to be like broody or, to be like falling head over heels, but just to feel more inclined to help and more involved, and just see value in what they can offer as well, I think is important. Yeah,
because I've heard a lot of dads that seem to have, for lack of a better word, an easier way to connect when the kids get older. They have a more difficult time connecting when the kids are infants than when they're older. And so that would suggest to me that it's a experience gap, is they need to be more they need to interact with babies more. That, just throwing a ball with a 5-year-old, or kicking a ball with a 5-year-old, or frisbee, or, running or swimming or coloring. I mean, that's fine too, but to find ways to have men connect with infants. And Even when I go into in early child education, it's very, very rare that there are male daycare teachers.
Yeah.
I don't know again about in Europe, but in the States, it's very rare. There are some, but it's very, very rare. And so there's a whole. I don't know if socialization is the right word or acclimation, but finding out how to get men involved in baby stuff, I guess, with the lack of a better word, I think would help them when they become parents.
Agreed. So maybe if someone is listening to this podcast and they have a newborn and they have a baby, they need to get on to their friends who don't yet have them and say, "Hey, you need to come help me. You're gonna come learn to change a nappy, change a diaper." That's what maybe that.
Well, that's a great point. Like there should be social media groups around new dads and babies. Where are where's the support? You've got support out there for all sorts of things. And certainly when it comes to parenting, it's a niche down in all sorts of ways, but I don't see a lot of support for that. And to your point, I said, you mentioned a couple of guests. I had a very close friend whose wife is a doctor, and he graduated with a teacher's degree, but he was the one who raised his two daughters until they got into middle school, and he became a teacher. But he actually, when he would show up with an infant to like playground or he'd get weird looks. He had a very difficult time. He's got a whole list of stories about, what happened to the mom and what happened, where's your wife and how come she, he'd be interrogated every time he'd be the one to show up for Gymboree or whatever he was coming for. So it's very interesting in this day and age that we still haven't figured out a way to get males more connected to that part of the process. And it's going to take all of society, whether it's just not only the men, but also the women supporting the men through that process to be able to get them. And I wish I would have had more of that before I became a father.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope anyone listening can kind of see a pathway to kind of put some of that into action, whether they are a new dad or a dad that's been around for a while, and just kind of pass that on maybe to the younger generation, let's say, or the future dads. So Marty, thanks so much for taking time and joining us here on Dad Dialogue. It's been wonderful speaking to you. Thanks so much for your time.
So grateful, Laurence. It's been great, and best of luck to you.
Appreciate it. And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a massive thank you to Marty for coming on the show, sharing his stories with us. I really appreciated Marty's area of expertise and diving into this world of neuroscience and brain development for young children. I did find it super interesting just to kind of hear the professional opinion juxtaposed with the personal parental opinion of his experience of being a dad as well as being a grandfather now. I think that can really just make things relevant and bring things home and kind of ground it in a sense of true understanding of what the day-to-day life is really like, as opposed to just trying to interpret research papers or articles and these sorts of things. So I really hope that it was impactful and useful for you. If you want to hear more of Marty, I'll leave links to his website and his TEDx talk and other things where you can check him out up in the description. So please do check out the links if you'd like to hear more from Marty. If you want to get in touch with me, go over to daddialogue.co.uk. I would love to hear from you over there. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you have an awesome day, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.